Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first edition of Insights, which I will be co-hosting with Dr. Roberta Lepre, where we will be discussing the role of the Board of Directors in times of crisis. I would like to welcome our guests today, Mr. David Schwireb, the President of the Malta Chamber of Commerce, and Mr. Edwin Wood, the Chairman of the Institute of Directors for the Malta chapter. Thank you for being with us today and for joining us, both David and Edwin. So today we're starting, I think, by answering the first question, which is the most important, the role of the Board of Directors, especially during this time. Companies more than ever need direction from different aspects, a lot of legal ramifications, both in terms of clients, contracts, supply chain, as well as employees. What would be the best practice? I mean, I'm participant in different boards of non-public listed companies, and boards have almost transformed themselves into task forces, where they meet more frequently, almost every week, so as to assist and support the executive management team more and more during this time, CEOs, general managers that are managing companies. What do you think? How can Board of Directors reach that balance of kind of stepping in without overtaking or overruling the management of the company, yet again provide the required assistance? Maybe David, you would like to start?
By all means. Thank you first of all for the invitation. Very happy to form part of this discussion. A very pertinent question, and of course there's I would say no magic wand on the solution to what we're going through, because I hope to believe that not too many of these experiences are taken on during anyone's lifetime. Hopefully, you know, it will be just the one in our lifetime. Certainly, a lot has to do with the professional and personal relationship that there would exist between the board of management and the executives, I would dare say. Now, before the pandemic started, most of the discussions and the trust levels that would enrich the professional taking on of any decision taking, whether it be a positive one, that is growth, say, or expansion or internationalization, or whether it is one where one needs to restructure, reorganize, rehash business models and all that. The ongoing discussion relationship between the board of directors and the executive team headed by the CEO is of paramount importance, and that is really the basis for success or otherwise of any difficulty that any company finds itself in. During these periods of a pandemic, certainly the same applies. It's just that the task at hand is maybe bigger than what one would expect, and certainly not programmed or anticipated, and certainly not enough time for preparation, if you like, for the very immediate effects or the immediate actions that needed to be taken. And therefore, as one would expect, the board would be again in support of the executives in as far as the executives are needing support and help. Of course, every brain, every pair of eyes, and every pair of hands, and every opportunity and time is great in support of what the executives are really up to. Making sure that the executives are in contact with the best knowledge and updates on the opportunities that can help any team or any executive team, and therefore any company, weather the storm. Of course, answerable to shareholders, because after all, the directors are ultimately answerable to shareholders in a manner which links, therefore, the answers to shareholders through the actions and the trust that one has with executives. Of course, where executives are not able to achieve the expectations of the board of directors, unfortunately, then the directors will have to roll up their own sleeves and get involved. But that is, of course, that should really happen only at a time when the ability of the executives to deal with such extreme influences or reactions or results of this pandemic are far-reaching and beyond the abilities of the team in that company.
And how do you see it working, David? Do you see the involvement of different experts coming in, not necessarily the directors that might have that expertise, but the board asking different experts to come in and join in?
Absolutely. So every opportunity to understand where the weaknesses are or where the voids in expertise and the knowledge and therefore in consultation to be brought to the fore, close to the executives, is an opportunity of support that the director can provide to the company. Of course, personal experience or rather the realm of experiences that the board of directors can bring to the executive team is important, but that probably is also probably not enough. There's the need for joining the dots with people the directors are aware of that can be brought to the fore, to the availabilities, if you like, of the executive team to try and find the best way to swim through the waves of this pandemic.
Excellent. Edwin, we've shared quite a lot of interesting insights even prior to this call. Your experience with the members of the IOD, how are they dealing with this pandemic or crisis, if you like, and what would be the best practice of positioning themselves with the executives? You've also mentioned a little bit trust. Is there trust between the different members, the executives and the directors? Would you like to share something on these lines?
Well, first of all, well done for organizing this session. I think
Thank you.
we're all very interested to participate in sessions of this type because we're all in the same boat at the moment trying to solve very difficult problems. And there's, apart from a lot of different moral issues arising, there are many different kinds of legal issues and cultural issues. And I'm sure Roberta will pick up on some of the legal issues. I want to pick up on something that David said, which is regarding shareholders. And it's a very important point because there has been a shift in thinking. It began a couple of years ago. And last year, the USA Roundtable, which is the creme de la creme of the Fortune 500 companies, they issued their they are considered to be very authoritative as a business grouping. They issued a new paper on the way that they see the role of companies in the marketplace. And interestingly, the sixth point on their list of objectives for companies to reach was making a profit.
Mm.
But their number one and number two points were that essentially today companies should first and foremost be cognizant of the stakeholders rather than the shareholders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think we should be conscious of this in Malta because one of the things that we're seeing, we're looking at this relationship between the board and the management. The CEO is usually embedded within the board, and the board will oversee the work of the CEO. And the CEOs have had it, relatively speaking, quite easy over the last few years. We've had record gross domestic product year on year. Tourism industry was booming. There was a very good climate in which to do business generally. You know, the focus for growth was not really such a very difficult focus for most CEOs, but you know that has been turned upside down in a matter of a month. The CEOs who were hired to grow companies are not necessarily the ones who are going to dig businesses out of a hole. And what we are seeing at the IOD and also talking with our counterparts like David at the Chamber of Commerce and various other partners is that many people in a month are now running distressed businesses. And they would be legally classified as distressed businesses. So, you know, in terms of the duties and responsibilities of directors in Malta, this all falls under Article 136A of the Companies Act, and it's quite specific. So in terms of how to navigate between the operational demands and the duties, the obligations, and even the liabilities of the board, this is creating a new kind of tension. And within that, I think there are a few things that have to be kept in mind. That usually you would expect in a time of crisis like this, that the chair and the CEO will form a very special bond. They should have one anyway. But at this point in time, that relationship, the relationship between the chair and the CEO, that's going to be vital. If it's a good, supportive, mentoring relationship, probably those companies have a good chance of doing some of the right things which might enable them to survive. And if that relationship is off at any level, there's a very good chance that that will force the board into having to take other forms of corrective action. So, you know, we're saying that with the existing Companies Act, the responsibility in Malta is really towards the shareholders.
Right.
But we must keep in mind that there is already a problem of many companies sitting on their cash, and they're not servicing the supply chain, which is the stakeholder base, and that's going to have a chronic knock-on effect, and this will make boards' lives much harder.
Edwin, you mentioned tension between the chair or possibly the board and the CEO or the whole of the executive management team. How much of that is a result of a history of perhaps insufficient communication or a relationship which is based on mistrust?
Well, you know, we've, I think both David and I have already alluded to this, that today is probably the most abnormal business environment that we have ever come across.
Mm.
And it's new to everyone. And anything new can, in its own way, be something that rattles us. It puts us off balance. It makes us defensive sometimes. It creates a lot of different kinds of reaction. And companies are generally not all that good at innovation.
Mm.
So, you know, this is an environment now which is demanding a high degree of skill in terms of innovation just to survive. It means changing business models. It means that either a CEO will have to come up with different kinds of business models and go to the board and try and convince the board that changing the business model is actually a good thing to do, and make the case for that, and show some kind of factual evidence that the numbers would stack up, which is not an easy thing. We're being told, many SMEs are being told already by some of the local banks that they should be putting forward cash flow statements for 6 months before the banks can even consider any form of emergency lending. You know, it's hard to look ahead 30 days right now. This time last month, the new restrictions that were being put in place by government to help protect the population were only just being announced. And today we've already got tens of thousands of people whose jobs are at best very uncertain. So 30 days is a long time in this environment.
Indeed. In fact, on your point, Edwin, this is what I wanted to mention, the question of timing. Timing is surely of the essence, and is very, very critical, like you mentioned, and is very much against us. We were previously having a bit of a discussion as well with David regarding not only timing at a national level, but also timing at an international level, which is very, very critical because we're so much dependent as an economy as well on the international factors, and the fact that not each and every country has been through this pandemic at the same time, or is leaving, or is actually taking different measures, that actually, of course, adds up to the difficulties and the complexities of, for a CEO and for an executive management team to put forward a plan that can actually be substantiated and presented to the board, where the board actually will be able to take decisions upon it. So we're kind of seeing a redirection of more of short-term planning rather than long-term planning for sure. And I've been participant again to 13-week cash flow forecast, for instance. And this is something which I wanted to share with you and perhaps discuss in this manner. Is this a realistic measure, 13-week? Is it too short? Is it too long? Is it, David, what do you think? Is it something which can be presented to the board and can actually help the board to take the right decisions in this time?
Okay, so thanks, Nadia, for that question. Even at the risk of maybe speaking about the obvious, but I'm going to try and do this just to be clear. Of course, we are living a time where and experiencing a pandemic of which we have limited experience, except for other pandemics in limited parts of the world, or for large pandemics such as this, which happened nearly 100 years ago. We talk about, and we hear about, and we are happy to hear about curves and health curves that deal with people that are tested for coronavirus and the numbers of the infected people. And we eagerly wait every day to hear the Superintendent of Public Health to speak to us about the numbers that have been diagnosed with this coronavirus in Malta. And to be honest, we're always, in a way, appreciative of the fact that our superintendent, I'm not sure what the numbers are today, I haven't caught with that yet, but the numbers are relatively low, sometimes in less than 2 digits, which is a good thing. And why is this a good thing? Because, as has been explained to us many times, we're trying to have a curve which is as flat as possible, because we do not want our curve to be higher than the plateau on top of the curve which is really the ability of our health infrastructure to be able to take care of each and every one of us, even at the level of ITU. Okay, so that's a good thing. Of course, the corollary to that is the effect that this is going to have on the economy. The longer we're able to stretch the curve and to be able to address the health requirements of our people, the longer it is going to take us to get out of this pandemic, not only from a health perspective, but even more so from an economic perspective. I would dare say, at least from the numbers that we have seen, is that whilst Italy has had one of the highest curves one can imagine, America's pretty much following suit. Spain, we've heard, the UK. Actually, the higher their curves are, of course, they're going to have many more deaths, and that's something we should not aim for or strive towards. But certainly, the curve, if we look at areas under the curve, for those of us who are statisticians, the length of the curve is going to be shorter. So these countries and other countries will have a shorter curve, and therefore will be out of the COVID pandemic, unless there are secondary or tertiary influences of this, will be out of this before we do. The fact that our curve is so low implies that we might actually be one of the countries that will get out of this last. Again, which is a good thing from a health perspective, not so good from an economic perspective. So again, coming back to your question, the conversation we have had just before this call, is what do we do about this? So we as a Chamber of Commerce are taking initiative to support business exactly in this sense. Do we wait for the curve to reach its maximum height and then start dealing with this? Do we wait for the curve to go away and maybe talk about COVID only in our history books, put it in the past and then start reorganizing? Or do we do it now? Or is this a time when we need to realize, as a nation, as a country, and also as in individual companies, as directors, as CEOs in companies, and say, you know what, probably for the foreseeable future, and this could be a considerable number of months, we're going to be living with COVID, and we're going to be living with some sort of social distancing of some extent, maybe not as much as now, but some extent will be with us for a considerable period of time. And we therefore need to find ways and means of how to either refresh ourselves, to re-engineer ourselves, to make use of technology maybe much more than we used to before, in order to live business experience with COVID and not after COVID anymore. If we delay this discussion too much, or if we delay action too much, we might find ourselves overtaken by the competition, potentially in Malta, but even more so internationally, and therefore we will have very little to talk about in terms of competitivity and our ability to compete with the international realm. So yes, the suggestion certainly is, this is not going to be with us. This is not going to be with us for a short period of time. It's going to be with us for a long period of time. All the, I would dare say, false impressions that we have that maybe this will all be over in a couple of weeks' time and summer will be with us, and this is good because we need to deal with the psychological influences of COVID. We have to remember, apart from the health sector, the actual COVID health and the economic, there's also the psychological, and that's certainly very serious and not easy to deal with. So the positivity in our communication is very important. However, if we are responsible for our companies as CEOs, as board, as directors, then we need to think of the long haul. And the long haul is re-engineer, reorganize now, and whatever needs to be done, engage the very best that are able to provide the best advice for this to be done, and let's re-engineer now.
So irrespective of, sorry, Roberta, please.
Yes, I just wanted to pick up on this a little bit because I relate a lot to this in the sense that I am coming across a number of business owners, primarily small business owners, who seem to be just waiting for all this to end and to go back to what was. But also touching upon what Edwin mentioned in his intervention earlier on, where he mentioned the need to innovate. We know that innovation wasn't our forte before all this happened. So is this an opportunity for boards, for businesses to innovate in the long term, not just as a response to the crisis, but as something that has been a long time coming as well.
Is there something, Edwin, which you would like to share something on these lines, or?
Well, Malta struggled on innovation for a number of reasons. It was unable, for example, to effectively gather funding from the EU over the last funding period, and even the prior funding period. We had very low success rates in attracting funding for innovation. So, we know this is a problem both in the public sector as much as it is a problem in the private sector. But with the idea that we're going to suddenly learn that the innovation process is something that can help to lead us out of the very drastic difficulties that some of the economy is getting into. That's going to take a lot of expertise. It's going to take a lot of training. It's going to take a lot of changing of mindsets. I think we have to encourage the leaders of the business community to help promote the idea that there has to be an enormous, very rapid mind change at every level and in every organization. I was at one time, until quite recently, a rugby referee, and the formula for making a decision as a referee is basically the speed at which you can say to yourself internally, immediately. So we are in an environment right now where immediately, urgently doing things has to be the new norm. And we're often associated unfairly with having a kind of relatively laid back culture at some level. This is what people often say. Their first impressions are of Malta, that it's quite easygoing and laid back. No one in any business here who wants to survive can afford to be laid back in any way, shape, or form. They will lose their investments and possibly will help to crash other businesses that are doing the right things. We have to remember everything here is interlocked. We might individually be doing the right things as chairs, as CEOs, as executive directors, as advisory non-executive directors, and our immediate supply chain or creditors might be doing the wrong things, and they will put us in jeopardy because we have a problem at the moment with the financial ecosystem. And even there, we are going to need to innovate rapidly if we want to survive. We've been saying for years that there was a lack of venture capital. And quite honestly, there is still a lack of venture capital. But we definitely need to retool this financial ecosystem very quickly if we all want to survive.
In fact, at best, Edwin, we need to realign the strategy even with banks and other support financial institutions, because like you mentioned, if banks are still asking for a 6-month cash flow forecast, that is very difficult for companies to provide at the moment, for sure. So there are Very rightly so, as you mentioned, everything is a chain. So we have the government, we have authorities, we have the institutions, we have companies. And the more we can collaborate into this new normal, because it's a reset button, I believe, for each and every one of us, the better, I think, for companies will be to transit through this particular moment, particular crisis, particular point in time. And in fact, something else which we mentioned about the scenario analysis and other matters. So basically what we're saying here, the importance to realign our business models. It's not a waiting game, really, because most of the companies, at least that's my experience, we're still somewhat overwhelmed for sure. So it's they're still going through that process of making sure that there's the government funding and they receive the funding first. And it's kind of more of a phased approach in their minds. It's like first we receive the funding and then we'll wait and see, because there is a little bit of that unclarity. But perhaps the message over here is it's the time. It's time from now to start rethinking. It's time for now to start thinking of other ways of living with this COVID situation, as David mentioned. Robert, I don't know whether you agree, disagree, or...
Yes, I agree fully. Also, maybe another question would be how equipped are our boards to lead this change? Are they the ones to be leading this leap? And are they equipped to do this?
Yes, if I may, on the score, I mean, also latching on to the two comments that Nadia and Roberta, both of you, put forward just now. Yes, I think, and this is my personal experience, that's because, of course, I'm meeting lots of people who are speaking to me about, you know, how the chamber can help and what the chamber is doing at the moment. And the focus of attention of most people that speak to me still lies with how they can get their companies involved or their employees involved in these famous annexes A and B that I think everyone is now aware of, and how they and why it is that their company is left out of the first list and what they should do, you know, to get into the list, which of course is surgery, and it's important. But my fear, and that's why we have changed and developed our thinking process since about 2 weeks ago, when this was absolutely the absolute top priority and necessity of discussion, is to start talking about what it is that we need to do to correct this, and actually to work to get our companies out of Annex A and Annex B rather than in, because the fact that you are out means that your business is in safe territory and re-energized, re-motivated, restructured, and therefore ready to go. And probably the faster you're able to do it, the stronger and the more profitable your business is going to be moving forward when COVID is done and dusted. And that change in mindset is it needs a lot of work. And I have been putting a lot of time and effort into this myself, and the chamber, of course, as well, to try and get people to think that way. It's not easy, because we are in this country, we're still focused on what it is that I can get from government to save, you know, to save the day today without quite putting enough effort. But we keep reminding people that this is where what they should be doing. That is why we have organized our think tank thematic committee. That is why we have now a number of roundtables that are sector specific. Not only because we want these people to think and feed back into the chamber and will disseminate back into the market, and therefore to our members and to business leaders and to the politician and regulator that should really support this, but to get the word out there that this is really the conversation we should be having. And ultimately, if a part of this ends up on the desk of a CEO or on the desk of a executive, non-executive director, certainly a conversation within a board, that is healthy. We would like company boards to talk about, yes, whether they could get the €800 help for every employee to their business today, fine. That's an application and the process of administration really now. But rather, what it is that we should all be doing to get out of this. And really and truly, if I am, of course, in an organization which expects to be in a leading role in my industry when all of this is done and dusted, then the earlier I do this, the stronger I'm going to be. And the earlier we all realize this as a nation, the better it is going to be for us to compete with other countries when we are doing business and competing internationally.
Indeed, I share that sentiment completely, David. I think it's the wrong perception having companies just to think on the actual situation. Survival and consolidation is important, very much so. And this leads me to, however, to something else, which I think in the past with my fellow directors, there has always been a little bit of a debate. How much reserves should a company have? I mean, prior to all this, it has all started. Because I mean, I was accused a couple of times that I've been too conservative of perhaps having 6 months cash reserve equivalent to a salary wage bill. And with the benefit of hindsight, nowadays, the fact that with some companies that I'm working with, the fact that there is the aid, but that there is also enough cash to be able to reinvent for the company to take forward, of course, investment. It's not like that the mindset is there. So I do appreciate that there are difficulties. I do appreciate that it's difficult for shareholders. It's challenging for owners to actually envision a tomorrow and that there is actually a tomorrow. So that's why the support of the board is actually paramount. But it's interesting to hear your views, David, and even Roberta, because I don't think I've discussed this with you, Rob, of what's the best practice? What's obviously different industries, different models. Is there actually a model that actually we can take forward for companies as a best practice?
I think we have to be a little bit careful here. Most business owners, entrepreneurs, are self-reliant. These are people who don't enjoy taking a handout from anybody. And it's part of their DNA also to be risk takers. So when times are good, the main reason why an entrepreneur who's a CEO needs a board is to balance their risk taking and their investment strategies against being, let's say, a little bit too adventurous or too bold, too innovative, moving too fast. And they might still do it anyway and pull it off, but at least they would have heard the advice of the board that's been put in place. Now we know that in the regulated industries, there are some thresholds which are set. So, for example, banks, insurance companies, and others are given a mandatory minimum, which they absolutely must retain in cash. And if you look at it in the banking sector in the EU, it's approximately 15% of the deposits. So that's quite a large number. But
Indeed.
in relation to the operation, it's actually a number which is very questionable. You know, if you take some of our banks locally, their loan portfolios are up to 70% between corporate and domestic lending on property. And at the moment, one of the most urgent requirements is to keep the property market at least not going into free fall. Because if it does start to go into free fall, this 15% reserve will be insufficient to even get through the first week or two. So, looking at what would be the right kind of reserve, that probably the best reserve is actually the people that you hire into your business, the talent that you have available. If that talent is able to change direction quickly and is working with you to solve the immediate pressing problems, then there's a pretty good chance that all pulling together, you can get out of this. It's not a question of money. It's a question of people, whether or not they are able to be led and work as a group in order to confront this problem. And I would say, coupled to that, we have a lot of laws which are coming into play at the moment, the Companies Act, the Insolvency Act, Occupational Health and Safety Act,
Yes.
Commercial Code, ad infinitum. We've got all manner of legislative requirements. But what we do really need from companies right now is very clear communication about what they are willing to do, and to make this communication available as much as possible across the market, so that we can all take the right decisions. I mean, I was talking with an economist the other day, and he was reminiscing about his days as a student, and the idea of perfect information. But here is a good example of needing high quality information from companies on which you can base your own decisions. So it's about people, and I think it's also about communication, rather than defining an amount of cash that you should keep in reserve for a rainy day, just in case something horrible happens.
I think it's a bit of a balance, and it depends very much on the industry and the company as well. So you're right in a way, Edwin. David, your views on this one?
Well, Edwin has been very detailed and very correct in what he said. So I certainly agree with everything that he said. I frankly have very little else to add, really, to his comments.
Indeed.
Can I add a cheeky question on a final note? Edwin, you referred to the fact that the sort of DNA of entrepreneurs, business owners, is to be risk takers. We know, generally speaking, that perhaps females are more risk averse, and we do know that we do not have many females sitting on board in this country. Is this perhaps the time to make the case for better gender balance on company boards?
Well, we've been making this case at the IOD for let's say for the last 18 months or so. Prior to that, perhaps we didn't articulate this as effectively as we could have or should have. But today, we are advocating very strongly that there is a need for more talent to come forward onto boards. There's an enormous amount of talent available if companies are willing to look for it. We, I think, have in our board at the IOD, we've got about 40% representation, roughly, by women, and it's not high enough. It needs to be higher, because I think, more or less our society is balanced around 50-50 or 51-49. If I remember rightly, it's something like that. So if it can also be reflected on different kinds of boards in the public sector and in the private sector, we'll get a better representative range of opinions. And I don't think it's only about gender. It's also, you know, unfortunately, if almost every event that we do as IOD, I wind up introducing 3 or 4 other rather elderly looking gentlemen similar to myself. So we do need younger people to be given a chance. We plan as IOD to introduce some form of young person to boards who can be mentored on boards. They might be talented individuals under the age of 30. We're certainly looking to try and bridge this gap. There's a big gap between a lot of management cultures and the boards. So you might find that the management is on average 30 to 40 years of age, and the boards are 60 plus. This does go for quite a large number of local organizations. So we do need to close that gap. And I think, you know, if we can have a longer view on the contribution that everyone in society can make to boards, whether it's public or private sector, and we can keep the gender conversation going so that we actually do achieve change there. I mean, it is happening, but it's happening very, very slowly. You know, maybe what COVID might help to inspire is more rapid change. And of course, we would be very much for that.
Indeed. One last comment from your end, David, just to wrap up this interesting discussion.
I certainly agree with what was said and your suggestion, Roberta. The Chamber of Commerce as well, I might add, let me use the Chamber as an example here, not to point fingers at anybody, had maybe historically been connected with the representation of elderly gentlemen. And that was not right, even though it did bring about the success story that the Chamber of Commerce can boast about. However, when you look at the Chamber of Commerce today, we have a young chamber network, so we have engaged CEOs and executives that are directors who are less than 35 years of age. Certainly, they are the ones that we're looking at to be able to energize not only the chamber, but also the next steps in the economic development of the country, potentially even the economic recovery of the country after COVID. If I look at boards of management and councils, I mean, today, out of 6 board of management members, 2 are female. That's not enough. It should be at least 50%. But when you compare it to 0% a couple of years ago, we've come a long way. And I might add, without mentioning any names, that the female component of our board is part of the richest part of the contributions to our board. And that's the reason why the Chamber of Commerce is making so much strides forward in its, I dare say, success story that we are enjoying right now. Again, the ability to have the older perspective, the younger perspective, the gender perspective, I might also add one day the racial considerations, you know, the fact that people have different cultures and different observations to any discussion one can have in a board table or in an executive in a company is actual value to the company rather than a limitation. So, and in a country which is becoming much more diverse, racially diverse, that should be embraced as a strength, not only for the company, and not only for the company, but also for boards and people in management and directorships. And that is how the opportunity to look at any issue from a 360-degree angle is actual value to the shareholder ultimately, and that's why such a suggestion is certainly a good one.
Excellent. So on this note, I think we've wrapped up very nicely. That hopefully, through this pandemic, we take away some good positive developments in this regard, with regards in terms of both in terms of gender diversity and balance, as well as in terms of presence for boards to be able to support the companies, their shareholders, as well as their executive management teams. Thank you, David and Edmund, for joining myself and Roberta.
Thank you very much, Nadia and Roberta. Thank you.
We look forward to our second edition next week at this very time at 2 p.m. Thank you very much.
Well done on this initiative. It's a fantastic initiative.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Rob.